Okay, so we had a kind of quite a gap of 1 week or so. For, since then we have not kind of I could not able to meditate much on this particular problem of searching for the origin of consciousness, or the nature of consciousness. But still, I know if we can recap and recall back what are the points that we have discussed and where we have left, right? And if you remember and if you recall, so the point of origin of consciousness led us to a place where we say we have of course we have not really investigated so deep into the neuroscience, but we have just started with a philosophical argument. And with that philosophical argument, we have progressed by the cause and effect, and we say that it may be, if you kind of think of in terms of the cause of each of the event, then it has led us to a place where we have all say that energy is the one, could be a more fundamental things than anything else. If you go by that route, right, if you say that consciousness is an emergent property of something else, then we say that probably that something could be that energy, right? And then if we are saying that something is energy, then there we have to introduce, we have to, in order to explain it properly, right, whether the energy could really gives rise to consciousness, then we have to have few more parameters needed in order to explain which means that energy should be somehow or other, it should gives rise to consciousness. So that is what is our, at least in the modern physics, we have lot more work that people have already done, and some amount of understanding we have developed regarding this energy, right? It is when you talk about the origin, right, with respect to other mechanical, electrical and other things, we are some extent sure, but when you try to trace back the origin, the problem becomes very, very challenging. And that is what is the things. And once we reached at that place of energy, then what is, how does it causing this, the step by step, if at all we think it is correct, right, then we should have the step by step the process or the methodology which ultimately really gives rise to consciousness. So we have, from the energy we have a relationship with the mass, from the energy we have a relationship with the other things like the force, other things like work, other things like a displacement, and so on so forth, right? And and this energy, force and the mass, they are somehow maybe very, very much related, which we do not know, being a non-physicist. So probably that's where people are also trying to figure out theory of everything, where you can put together all those parameters which seems to be correlated and come up with a common equation which would explain the relationship, right? So which means that if we wanted to either we can say that in this sense, either we can say that originally there was only one thing and which has given rise to multiple things, we can say in this way, or originally there were multiple things, which means that multiple things were existing since time immemorial, which means that multiple things were eternal. So now, but if you are saying that energy is a kind of only one sort of things, or is there any variety in it, okay, if there is any variety in it, then that also needs to be explained. But our point is that how do you explain this particular thing which we are calling it as a consciousness, right? And we have also discussed about what are the understanding regarding energy from the Vedic wisdom, right? And we have said that according to the Vedic wisdom, it says that energy, whatever the energy we call, it is basically in a kind of, it's like it basically it is in the domain of consciousness. So the energy cannot be the cannot be the domain of which is right. So probably here we need to be a little careful whether the energy could be in the domain of consciousness, and probably we have to go back and look back the scripture what it talks about the energy, right? But it is definitely very clear that according to the Vedic wisdom, it distinguishes or the differentiates the energy into two kind of category. One, what we call it is a spiritual energy, and another what we call it is a material energy, right? Now we need to have a more clear distinction and more specific characteristic of these two energy, and our main tracing point, like the point which we want to trace, is that how does this energy ultimately gives rise to consciousness, or is it that consciousness is giving rise to energy, right? So that is our in a point of understanding. That is what this is on this point we are interested in. But today we would like to go back to that brain, the place from where we have started, and try to contrast the understanding of the modern science with that of the understanding that is given in Bhagavad Gita, right? And if you look at the understanding of the Bhagavad Gita on consciousness particularly, so it tries to classify, or it tries to distinguish the different kind of object which are having the different properties and the qualities. So first the Bhagavad Gita clearly distinguishes them, and then it tried to explain the relationship among all those, like how each of those elements or the components work together as a system. So that is what thing. So if you look at Bhagavad Gita, clearly the first distinction is that it distinguishes between the life and matter, okay, or which means as the matter and consciousness. When you say the life, so the consciousness is inherent in it, right? So this is the first distinction, and within that matter it further distinguishes between further distinguishes, and it says that there are matter which are kind of gross, okay, and there are matter which are kind of finer than little gross, and there are matter which are little subtle, right, and the subtle matter. And if you look at what are those, so the gross matter essentially comprises of the physical entity which is having the mass, right, which is having the mass and which has the inertness in it. So it does not does not consist of any consciousness, so it is not an capability to. And then more finer than this gross matter are the senses. The senses are matter, they are the matter, they are made up of the matter, but they have got the extra features, or the features of ability to sense, right, ability to sense the things and pass on to the another component, another more subtle component, right? And what is that more subtle component? And that more subtle component is what we call it as a mind. So the mind has a capability to experience the thing, and mind has a capability to have a kind of, mind has got the property of willing and the feelings, and it's experience, right? It experience. So this is what we call it as a subtle matter. So whatever the thinking and the feeling, willing and some sort of experience comes, they are basically, according to the Vedic wisdom or the Bhagavad Gita, they are basically from the mind, okay? And if you go a little more further, the more subtle than this mind is actually the capability to distinguish the things, or the logical analytical ability of any living creature. So what we call it as intelligence, right, or buddhi, what we call it as a buddhi. And yeah, this is what is the more subtle than this. And more subtle than this buddhi is basically our identity, right? Or what we call it is a false ego of the identity. And if you look at very carefully, identity is so powerful that it drives everything else. It is so powerful that, and further than that is actually the domain of consciousness. But so interesting that this consciousness basically has a quality of being able to spread, okay, the quality of being able to spread, just like the light, spread across its vicinity. So it is like that. So the consciousness has capability of being able to kind of spread. So therefore it permeates through this the false ego, or it permeates through this intelligence or the buddhi. It permeates through the mind, and it also permeates through the senses and through the gross matter. So which means that whenever our senses, whatever our, let's say, eyes or the tongue or the nose are sensing anything, any object, sense object, that sense object, like that transmitted sense object, basically it goes to the mind, and mind experience. However, like ultimately it goes to that conscious entity, which is basically is having, according to Bhagavad Gita, being happy and being eternity and being in knowledge, right? Or what we call it is Sat, Chit and Ananda. That is what it is being referred as a conscious entity. Rest of the entities are not really a conscious entity. They are matter, which means that bereft of any conscious sort of properties. So this is what is our point of contention, and we wanted to investigate this particular hypothesis. We should not say hypothesis, but axiomatic truth, which is given in the Vedic literature, and wanted to establish this as a fact, right? So therefore the main point of the place where we are looking at is neuroscience in the brain, and from there we wanted to trace back where the mind is sitting and where the senses are sitting particularly. Okay, we see here the eyes, but eyes is only one part of the senses, right? It is one part of the senses. The senses is basically a system, and through the eyes it captures the form or the images, and it processes in particular visual cortex in the neuron. And it is not just the process. Once it processes the experience, it generate, which basically it generates the mind, and not just the experience, and ability to extract the intellectual content out of that, which is the function of the the intelligence. And not only that, and ability to identify someone with respect to whatever we are seeing it through the senses. And not only that, deriving the happiness out of it, right? Deriving the happiness out of it, which is the function of the conscious entity, probably, right? And so this is how the things, the entire systems are so nicely coupled or connected, that it sometimes seems to be difficult to distinguish them. But if we really wanted to understand what exactly, from where exactly the consciousness is origin, then we have to probably trace back through this path, right? So our problem definition here is like that. So we will start at looking at the brain, but we will not stop investigating the root cause, and we'll take this path and we'll trace back to the original root cause, whatever is given in the Bhagavad Gita, which is nothing but the living entity or the life particles. So this will be our main approach of entire exercise or the entire investigation. So now I would like to summarize here. So we have the two routes here, right? The two pathways as we have discussed. One, we have started investigating the brain, and it took us to the energy, and another we are investigating, and it is, we wanted to take it through this route, that okay, it might have come from we'll look at the different region of the brain as it is being started, like by the research, what we call it is a neural correlate consciousness, or the NCC. And then from here we'll try to figure it out if there is anything and any distinguishable entity like mind, right? And from there again we'll go back and figure it out if there is anything which is distinguishable element like intelligence. So this may not be very easy problem to solve, right? Because those, for example, the mind which you are talking about, we do not know, what kind of substance it is, whether it is whether it is definitely, according to Bhagavad Gita, that is not a gross substance. So which means that we may not be able to have directly perceivable sort of things. Maybe we have to figure it out in an indirect way of perceiving such kind of substance, if at all exist, right? So it will be challenging. So this will be our approach, right? Yeah.